Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection and a sense of belonging, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we talk about sensitivity and the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there, to the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here today. This is an episode that Jen Perry and I put out as a bonus episode, I think 45 back in May, and it's one of the most downloaded episodes where we talk about the overall strengths and struggles of the highly sensitive person. So what I've done is I've taken the body of our interview and am putting a new introduction, and I'm going to come back on in the end. Because I get so many questions about this episode, I wanted to rerun it again. Jen and I did this episode because we were launching our highly sensitive groups. Now we're calling them courses. We ran a beta group together this summer that was really transformational. I'm very excited about what we're offering. And we realized it's kind of a growing learning process, but we realized that there's such a strong educational component and then the group component that it really is more like a course than just a group. I'm going to tell you about the 9 topics that we cover in this episode, and whether you're considering taking the course or not is really irrelevant. So let me tell you what the topics are and then how you can use this episode to kind of assess where you're at. We talk about group culture, expectations, and an introduction, mindfulness and self-compassion. And in this course, we've added more information about self-compassion that you may not hear as much about in this episode. Identifying the negative messages that we receive as highly sensitive people and turning them into superpowers. Perfectionism. Who, as an HSP, doesn't struggle with perfectionism? Demystifying or embracing our emotions. Knowing that self-care is non-negotiable. Boundaries are an imperative part of self-care. Communication, vulnerability, and authenticity. And then finally, creating a lifestyle that's HSP friendly and honors our HS needs. I like to call this the proper care and feeding of the HSP. So what I would encourage you to do is, as you listen to this episode, kind of check in with yourself and see where are you at in terms of all of these skill sets with relationships, your sense of personal satisfaction, if you're a parent, if you're a caregiver, if you have a partner, if you're a healer, how you're doing in work, and just doing an evaluation. Now, I know that we have a tendency to take in information and use it to beat up on ourselves, and that is not what the point of this episode is. And for each of these topics, we talk about some areas where you may be struggling and what it may look like if you are using these tools effectively in your life. And effectively is a judgment word, but I don't know how else to say that. This information is not to beat up on yourself, but to get really curious, because it's kind of a way to assess where am I at with some of these skills. And obviously, if we're leveling up, we're doing new things, we may be struggling more than we would at another time in our life. But I think it's just really important for us to see we often have way more skills than we think that we do, and then sometimes we've got some blind spots. I'm working on creating a webinar. I'm working on creating a self-test that at some point will be up on my website. This is a growing, living, breathing process that's changing, and so Jen and I are working constantly to update the curriculum and to figure out new ways to get the word out. Keep checking back to my website at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I'll do my best job to keep you updated on this podcast, but I'm recording so far in advance now that I may not be able to get information to you in time. The other thing that I'm looking at is creating a local San Diego meetup group that I'm going to call Unapologetically Sensitive. And my intention is to do like a short 2-hour meetup, probably the end of August, beginning of September, where you can come. Maybe we'll do a little bit of education. We'll get a chance to meet each other because I want to create a community for HSPs to thrive in. The other thing is that I have a lot of resources, and I've found that I'm doing way more Facebook Lives these days. And so if you're missing bonus episodes, there are a couple places where you can catch the Facebook Lives. I have an open page on Facebook called Unapologetically Sensitive. Then there's a closed Facebook group, also called Unapologetically Sensitive. You need to answer a few questions to get into that group. If you go to my website at unapologeticallysensitive.com, I have links to my Pinterest account, Instagram, YouTube. I post a lot of content, and there's a lot of stuff that you may not see if you don't follow me on Pinterest or Instagram, but I'm really about creating resources and services. The world needs HSPs, and I want us to know what our strengths are. There's something in this episode that the sound on my part is a little bit wonky. I don't think it's distracting, but I just want to let you know that I'm aware that it's there. At the end, I'm going to hop on, talk a little bit more about how we structure the groups. We've got a money back refund. We have some ways that you can get some personal information about the group. If you're interested in taking the group and you have a group of 6 people that want to take the group, with either Jen or myself, we run our own groups. We will try and accommodate your need if you have a group of 6 people. And I've had a number of therapists tell me that they're interested in a group. So again, if you want to get a group of therapists together, or you're a therapist and you want to create a group, let me know. And if I get enough therapists together, I'm happy to accommodate your needs. So I'm going to come back on in the end, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. And I have a special offer for you. But now, on to our episode, which is going to start with my introduction to Jen Perry and her bio. Here we go. So let me tell you a little bit about Jen Perry. Jen Perry, MSEd, MA, LPC, has been a psychotherapist for 20 years. She specializes in helping highly sensitive people thrive in love, work, and parenting highly sensitive children. Jen is passionate about using mindfulness and compassion-based approaches to ameliorate human suffering. If you look in the show notes, her links are there. You can reach her at jen@heartfulnessconsulting.com. And now, on to the show. Hey, Jen, welcome.
Hi, Patricia.
I'm so excited to have you here today. We've been working on this stuff for a while, so I'm really excited to share who you are with the listeners because I think they're going to love you as much as I do.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Sure. So I've already read your bio, but can you tell a little bit about, the work that you do and why working with highly sensitive people is such a passion of yours?
Working with highly sensitive people has really become one of my favorite aspects of my work. And I think it's really personal, actually. I remember that moment of, whoa, this is a thing. This is me. When I picked up Elaine Aron's book and started studying her research, and when I work with a client and they have that moment, I remember that moment. I remember that moment of, wait a minute, maybe there's nothing wrong with me. Maybe this is a part of who I am, and not in a bad way. So that moment of HSP pride and really being able to embrace the trait and the understanding of myself in that moment that came with all of that. Yeah, that's just amazing. That's my favorite part of my work.
Yeah. And tell me, why are you passionate about running these groups? What is it that feels really important to you about them?
Well, the way I see it, the more HSPs that, I forget which one of us, I know there's so many of us working out there with them now, that put it like a trained HSP versus an untrained HSP, right? So it's like a woken up HSP who understands themselves, understands the trait. I really feel strongly like the world needs us. The more HSPs that we can reach to tap into this power and the thoughtfulness, everything that comes with it, the better. I really sincerely feel like the world will be a better place, not only because the individual suffering will be ameliorated somewhat, right, with this new framework, but, HSPs are really valuable to society at large, and then there's bringing up HSP children to understand better who they are and to offer their gifts to the world. So the groups, the reason why I'm so excited, and I really appreciate this opportunity to connect with you and for us to work together on this, is just, I get kind of chills talking about it, just the scope. right? Of being able to reach more people. And, I really do believe that our work in the world as coaches, as therapists, has this ripple effect, right? So it's like what happens in the session then gets taken outside of the session and reverbs out when that person brings their light to everyone. It's like, you can light 1,000,000 candles from one candle.
I love that. It's been so much fun collaborating with you because I work pretty individually, and it's so nice to hear another part of the strengths of being a highly sensitive person and just our actual working relationship. From the very first day that we started, we had a little bit of a hiccup. something that just happened. Well, are you okay if I share?
Yes, please.
Because I think this is the gift of when we do our work and when we work with other highly sensitive people and non-highly sensitive people, we get these great connections. And as you guys know, I have a real issue around abandonment and people not being here for me showing up and nobody being here. And so our first online meeting, when we had talked about collaborating, Jen was about 10 minutes late. And I found myself feeling uncomfortable. And when we got on, something had hung her up. She apologized. It was very appropriate and we moved forward. But I had this little niggling in the back of my brain, like, if we're going to be collaborating on doing these groups and this is a pattern, this just doesn't go over really well with me. And so I took a risk and I thought, if I tell you and the relationship can't tolerate it, better to find out now than 6 months down the road when we're deep into this and find out that we can't handle conflict. And so I just said, I said, hey, I need to let you know this is a hot spot. I get that you're going to be late. I'm not asking you to not ever be late, but I need to let you know that this is a hot spot. And if you can let me know that you're going to be late, that really helps. How was that for you when I did that? Because it was kind of risky. We really didn't know each other very well at that point.
Yes. I mean, as an HSP, this is one of the big things to learn is to assert our needs in this really valid way, like not apologetically. I love the name of your podcast, right? Like unapologetically, this is something that I need. In that moment for me, I mean, I know I do run late. So it created a sense. So it's funny here. You think like there's a risk. Should I bring it up? And yet the trust that reverbed out of that, because even though we didn't know each other, I was like, okay, I know this person is going to really let me know what's going on for her. And it creates a lot of safety if you make space for it, because you don't have to guess. You can count on this person to be honest and to own, right, what their needs are. I mean, again, the promise of the groups is that in community, practicing this with each other is really powerful. So that was like a combination of me feeling a little sheepish about being late and a Yahoo. Like this is it. This is the dream.
Right. And the communication isn't about you being wrong. It's not about you having to change. It's about saying, hey, this is what goes on for me. And when we're allowed to bring that into the relationship, I don't have this thing now about like, oh my gosh, are you going to be here or not? Because I know that if you're running late, it's okay for me to talk about it. And I think that we often think that boundaries are about, I'm going to tell you what I need and you're going to meet that need so I feel comfortable. And it's not about changing anybody else's behavior. It's about having room in the relationship to talk about what comes up for me. And if you have feelings that come up for you around me saying, hey, it triggers me when you're late, then we have room to talk about that too. And now it becomes about the relationship and safety in the relationship and not about rules and being on time.
Yes. And the authenticity that can be there and the understanding. So the boundary isn't like you said, you're going to do, I need this, you're going to do it. It's, I need this and you're going to understand it. And when it doesn't get met, there's going to be connection and understanding there.
Right. Yeah. It's really beautiful. And so consequently, it's really been a joy working together. And every week when we've been meeting, we kind of do a check-in. We talk about what's going on. Like there's room in the relationship for that. And it really has created a tremendous sense of safety and connection.
Yes.
Yeah. Jen, let's talk about the different topics that we're going to be covering in the online groups. If you're listening to this in real time, you can go to unapologeticallysensitive.com. There's a tab there that says HSP groups. If you're listening to this in the future, There will be information about upcoming groups, but we wanted to talk about what we're planning on covering in these groups. And Jen and I will be running our own individual groups. So you have a chance today to see what our styles are. We'll be offering them in different time zones at different times. So we're trying to accommodate everybody's needs. The first week, what we're going to do is go over the introduction. We're going to talk about the group culture, expectations, creating community guidelines that work for everyone.
Yes. And top order is going to be really having a safe environment, right? It's just like we were just talking about being with each other and creating that sense of safety so that we can experiment with some new behaviors, right? And taking some risks together. That everyone's going to be seen and heard and treated respectfully.
We'll have a chance to do introductions so everybody gets to know each other, and we'll hear what everyone's goals are for the group. And we'll have a little bit of a chance to get to know each other.
Yes, and then we'll go over basic education about the trait. Everyone will have an opportunity to ask questions and have a discussion. There's a lot of richness in just sharing how we differently, kind of idiosyncratically experience the trait. We'll also be working on building some pride in HSP. The application of that pride, like how to bring that out into a non-HSP world. We're only 15 to 20% of the population. Generally, 80, 85% of the world is non-HSP. How do we really bring that out of ourselves, out of the group, and into our lives in a bigger way?
And recognizing that we live in a non-HSP world, we're only 20% of the population. So we get to learn how to assert our HSP needs and traits and to live peacefully with the other non-HSPs.
Yes.
Another topic we're going to look at is identifying the negative messages that we've received about being a highly sensitive person and turning them into superpowers. I've been told that we're too sensitive, we're too needy, we need to get thicker skin.
Right. We're not social enough. We're no fun, can't take a joke or have a sense of humor.
We're too picky, we overthink things, we worry too much.
We're too nice. We take over, we're over responsible for everything.
That feeling of being fatally flawed or not good enough. I think many of us have felt like we're misfits. I'm the only one. There's no one like me.
Yeah. And along with that kind of misfit archetype can really come this deep sense of not belonging. And there can be a lot of shame in that.
As we work on this in the group, we'll end up being able to embrace our traits, identify and talk about what traits resonate for us, and feeling confident in what our needs are.
Yes, being able to name our strengths that the trait gives us. And when we get feedback from the non-HSPs in our life, in the non-HSP world, really being able to see those comments and that commentary as being about the other person. That's a really important one.
And identifying when we get triggered and having tools to manage. And then this is going to come up in a number of the groups, but what I love to call the proper care and feeding of the HSP.
Yes, there's also going to be a lot of discussion around boundaries. I think a whole session on developing skillfulness, understanding boundaries and what they are. In our culture, we're all pretty bad about boundaries, and they're so important for HSPs particularly. By increasing our skillfulness around our boundaries, we'll be able to find ways, again, to live peacefully with the non-HPs and honor everybody's needs.
Yep. Another module is going to be self-care is non-negotiable. That often we get really stuck with people-pleasing and putting others' needs ahead of our own, or feeling guilty when we need to take care of ourselves.
And then feeling resentful when we meet everybody else's needs and not our own, which leads to us feeling drained, feeling depleted, feeling unappreciated and overwhelmed.
Or we end up feeling irritable or negative or easily annoyed, less patient, or more critical of ourselves and others. That sense of intolerance just starts to show up. On the other side of this, we'll learn to be more comfortable with self-centering.
Yes. That it's okay to put ourselves like front and center of our own universe because we can't pour from an empty cup. Self-care is really an imperative. And ultimately, a selfless act. It leads to us being able, it feeds back on itself, right? That if we put ourselves front and center, we make sure our own needs are being met, we're better able to be there for everybody else.
Right. There's often this belief that, well, I'm not being available for everybody else, but everybody benefits when we take care of ourselves. In the short run, that may not feel true, but in the long run, we take care of ourselves. And then there's so much more of us to give and a better version of ourselves.
Yes, yes.
We also learn to listen to what we need and want and trusting what we need and want. And then we want to take care of ourselves because we see how much better we feel and function when we're putting our needs first, when we make ourselves a priority.
Yeah, and also recognizing that when we're feeling out of balance, right, and getting aware of that we are ignoring our own needs, and that needs to be woven back in, right, to our daily lives. Ultimately, this will lead to having richer and deeper relationships because when we're fulfilled and coming from a place of that fullness, we have more to share and more to offer others.
When we feel out of balance, we know that we're ignoring our own needs, or at least we're aware that that's going on. And the result is we end up having richer and deeper relationships because we're more fulfilled and we're coming from a place where we have more to offer. The next group is boundaries. Boundaries are an imperative part of self-care. Many HSPs tell me that they feel really uncomfortable with conflict. They feel guilty, and we pick up on other people's feelings. We get worried that we might disappoint others or that they're going to get angry or frustrated.
Yes, that's a big pet peeve of mine because we kind of grab this word feeling guilty. We really need a new word because guilt implies that we've done something wrong, and setting boundaries in relationship, it's like as natural as a mountain range. It's healthy. Boundaries are natural. They're a necessary part of any healthy relationship. We haven't actually done anything wrong by needing to honor our boundaries.
Feeling not seen, not heard, not honored, not expressing our wants and needs, feeling resentful.
Yes, feeling powerless, right? Feeling taken advantage of, feeling like everyone else gets their needs met or what they want. One of the tricky things about boundaries is that often we want other people to anticipate our boundaries without us having to articulate them. So really learning how to articulate them.
And I think especially as highly sensitive people, because we're so tuned into what other people need and we can anticipate other people's needs, and they don't often do that back to us. And so there's this expectation of it's so clear to us, but I don't even think that many highly sensitive people realize that non-HSPs are just not dialed in. Mm-hmm. It's a real big area of conflict in relationships.
Right. So knowing that, right, we can take some more of the responsibility for having to clue our non-HSP folks and loved ones, right?
Yep.
About what our needs are.
So then on the other side of that is we learn that we can trust our feelings and that boundaries will actually reduce our sense of overwhelm when we learn how to set boundaries without emotion. So we're not being reactive. We're just really clear about what's acceptable and what's not, because boundaries make us a happy human. When we have an emotional flare, it's usually because a boundary has most likely been violated or a need hasn't been met.
Yes. Yes. And I think a lot of us do this thing where we think that asserting a boundary has to be done with like an edge, but it's really, we can state our boundaries very compassionately and with kindness and being firm about what's okay with us, what's not okay with us, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Seeing boundaries is creating safety, right, for ourselves and others, directly reduces our overwhelm. And, when we do it for ourselves, it also empowers other people to be thoughtful about their boundaries and create that safety in having them communicate their boundaries with us.
Yeah. And then it really helps us to own our power and being really clear in knowing what our wants and needs are, that it's perfectly acceptable and reasonable to be having the wants and needs that we have. And then we end up developing flexibility. So it's not about the rule, kind of like the example that Jen and I talked about in the beginning, but it's about the relationship and the context and having room in the relationship to talk about what comes up for each of the people. The next topic that we're going to look at is perfectionism. I hear from so many HSPs that we struggle with perfectionism, that feeling of not good enough, comparing, which never makes us feel any better, feeling inadequate.
Often perfectionism can keep us from starting things, kind of get us in that analysis paralysis, right? And not pursuing our dreams.
We end up overworking and overdoing, trying to get a sense of enoughness. And that just creates a lot of doing instead of being. There's a constant sense of unease.
Yes, and we get very critical, right? Very dug in and critical of ourselves and others and just things being very just dissatisfactory. I think it's really important to just put it out there that perfectionism is a myth, doesn't exist. There's no way to do it. And it's very oppressive, right?
Yep. It often leads to imposter syndrome, that sense of if people saw who I really am, that they would leave, they would reject me, they wouldn't want to know who I am because I'm showing you the shiny parts of me that are pretty and not showing you the parts of me that I'm not so happy about, that feel flawed. Brene Brown talks about that whenever you have perfectionism driving, shame is riding shotgun. And so we end up hustling for our sense of worth and doing for a sense of value instead of knowing that we have value because we live and breathe.
By addressing these in this session, when we talk about perfectionism, we're going to know that done is better than perfect, that we can build towards our goals in a more reasonable way. We don't have to overwork and overdo. We can bust through some of that shame that comes with not allowing others to see our vulnerability. And actually, this is part of claiming the strengths, right? Our vulnerability is what actually connects us to each other. Whenever we've got this facade of perfection and the imposter syndrome's right behind it and the shame is right behind it, when we let that go, when we name that as the myth it is, our sense of belonging and connection comes from allowing ourselves to be seen imperfectly. Right? That's when real connection, real belonging begins.
Yeah, and then we end up living from our values, regardless of whether the goals are met or not. So again, it's about the process and not the outcome. It's about the effort that we're putting into things. And it's like when you study for the knowledge, the grade will follow. But if you're going for the grade, you may not end up getting the knowledge. It's the same thing. So we end up having much more self-acceptance and more ease in relationships because the standards that we're setting are way more realistic.
I love that. When we have both the values focus and the goal that supports the value, we can set goals that are more achievable. And that just leads to more contentment. Because often, we don't get to our goals right away, but we can always be content that we're living in the service of the values. And that can be very, in and of itself, lead to a lot more satisfaction and actually accomplishing more because of that acceptance, right? Like there's support there, there's inner support there instead of the criticism and the driving, and which leads to the exhaustion.
The next topic we're going to look at is communication, vulnerability, and authenticity. And some of these are going to dovetail on other topics that we've talked about. But oftentimes we are afraid to say what we're thinking. We don't trust what we're thinking. We're afraid that we're going to be judged or criticized or be ridiculed.
Yes. I think a lot of this comes from living with this sense of, we don't know it at the time, but we're only 15% of the population. So what's wrong with us? Everybody else seems to have it all together and we're quote unquote too sensitive, right? So we often feel like our point of view is wrong or not popular, right? We're afraid to really show up in relationships and allow ourselves to be fully seen. And because we're so empathetic, we're afraid to upset someone, stir up problems in the relationship.
Right. And not trusting that ruptures are repairable, that this actually points at growth, that we grow in relationships after there is a rupture, and that ruptures are a natural part of attachment. It doesn't mean that there isn't an attachment. It's just part of growing.
Yeah, not being so afraid, right, to rock the boat, that when we rock the boat, that's what leads to those deeper understanding. So getting some skills with how to show up in the world more authentically, right? And as we do that, learning to do that while educating others about the trait, right? Why we might like an environment that's just so the lights are lower, there's less stimulation, there's quiet areas.
Right. We also learn to model healthy communication using authenticity and vulnerability. And what happens is we end up getting more depth in our relationship, which is what HSPs want. We want that sense of depth and closeness and trust in the relationship.
One person's work, Marshall Rosenberg's work on nonviolent communication, can really help with this too. It helps to kind of demystify some of the communication. And just a couple of his principles are that all behavior is basically an attempt to get a need met, and that feelings and needs just are. They're never in conflict. The strategies to get them met can be in conflict. That requires some creative problem solving. And ultimately, life is very figure outable, that we don't have to get into these, I guess, fights really about like who gets to write what's going on here, that there's space for everybody. Kind of like you were talking about at the very beginning of our conversation, to keep using that as like a theme, right? So, your need for me to show up on time was not in conflict with, whatever happened to me that day. And I think it was a client thing, right? That delayed me that day.
Mm-hmm.
that those things were not, those things are not in conflict with each other, right? And so that having empathy for both worlds and where they overlap and meet, again, that's nonviolent communication. So Marshall Rosenberg has a really great outline of how to kind of get some X-ray vision into that.
Right. And even going back to this example that we talked about, for me, feeling seen and heard and honored, that if you are late, that I know that you're going to understand that I may be triggered. And what I find is when the relationship can tolerate the communication and I own what my hotspot is, it ends up usually not being a very big hotspot. It just takes all the energy out of it.
Yeah. And there's no shame there because you're seen and held, right? That's really, that's the essence of what we've been talking about. That's actually not a rupture. So one word that I like to use is intimacy, that's into me, you see.
Mm-hmm. I love it.
Yeah.
So the whole relationship could be about, are you on time? Are you not on time? Am I getting triggered? Am I not getting triggered? And what we have instead is this connection about feeling seen and heard and valued. That is so much more important to me than whether you're here on time or 2 minutes late. Like that's where we can get focused on the content and not the process. And when the process works, that's where the depth is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Creating a lifestyle that's HSP friendly and honors our HSP needs. We often feel really overwhelmed. We feel fatigued. We feel resentment.
Yes. For an HSP living in a non-HSP world, we can pretty quickly get very drained. We can overwork ourselves. Pretty much it comes from living in a non-HSP world and trying to live like a non-HSP, right? So we've got even this like inner sense of alienation, right? When we're not tuned into what our needs are.
Right. So learning about what I love to call the proper care and feeding of the highly sensitive person, getting enough rest, enough downtime, enough quiet time, finding ways to move your body that feel loving.
I love that with exercise, right? That it's not always just what's on the to-do list to do exercise, but it's actually embodying it in a way that feels like self-caring, right? Because sometimes exercising, if we do it in a brutal way, is not very self-caring. So, right, making sure that it's joyful movement. Another source would be our spirituality, really spending time and making space for that in our life. Whether that's connecting with nature and feeling that deeper sense of connection to all things. Having also another important thing is having just the right amount of socializing. And again, when you're coming at this with, it's okay for me to be an HSP. I understand who I am. I understand this trait. And it's okay for me to be like, yeah, that's enough for now. We can really learn how to do our own socializing and also non-HSP events, right, in manageable chunks. This does lead to a deeper sense of connection. There's not that self-alienation because we are self-centering, right? We're understanding ourselves and allowing for that in our life. We're able to find more meaning in our life. One thing that comes up in some of my work too is knowing how to do social justice work with an understanding of HSP, right? So having activist mentors and balancing our concern with what's going on in the world and knowing how to support ourselves and take meaningful action based on our values in a very long game. I know a lot of HSPs are really called to do social justice work in the world, and that can be a really unique, particular kind of challenge for a highly sensitive person.
Another area that we're going to look at is mindfulness. So often as highly sensitive people, we feel really overwhelmed. We feel scattered. We've got that urge to numb out, whether it's using TV or social media or Netflix, whatever it is that we use when the world just feels like it's a little too much.
Yes. So mindfulness can really help with this. So we'll be going over some basic instruction, right? Both for formal practices and informal practices, moving meditation, guided meditation. And really what's at the heart of meditation is learning how to curiously observe what comes up and use it as information. Being kind and curious about ourselves as human beings. And so instead of reacting to things, it's like you get a little bit of a pause button so you can then respond instead of react.
It really creates a tremendous amount of self-acceptance when we're able to use mindfulness, because we end up having more self-compassion for ourselves and compassion for others. And like you said, being able to hit the pause button and meeting life on life's terms instead of arm wrestling with it, or what I feel like is sometimes it's like being the tail that's being swung around on the dog. I guess it's really not a very HSP friendly thing. I'm sorry about that, people. I love dogs and I would never swing a dog around by its tail.
As a metaphor, it works, right? I think it's life swinging us around.
Yes.
We're trying to, right?
Yeah. Note to self, do not use this analogy in the future. It is really not a very HSP friendly analogy. I do apologize, everybody. And finally, we talk about demystifying emotions. People feel like their emotions overwhelm them, or they feel like they can't control their emotions, or they feel like they're emotionally reactive, too dramatic.
Right. Or often there's a sense of being embarrassed by our emotions, not wanting to feel them, fears that if we do start to feel them, they'll never go away, that our feelings can somehow hurt us or hurt other people. Sometimes a term that's used is affect phobia, which is just a straight up like phobia, like feeling afraid to feel our feelings.
Right. And people feel afraid, like if I start to feel my feelings are going to overwhelm me and they're never going to go away. Or that sense of my feelings are going to hurt they're going to hurt me, or they're going to hurt somebody else. It's very young, like that feeling of if a kid tells their mother they hate them, that's going to be what the truth is. And like feelings are just feelings. They're just energy and they move through us.
Yes. Yes. That emotions actually are here. They have information. They can inform our actions or behavior, but they don't need to drive our behavior. And that it's safe. It's safe to feel our emotions. Our emotions are impermanent. The reason why they feel so unruly is that we can't control them. They do just kind of come up. And if we can get kind and curious about them and create some space for them, they have some wisdom for us. They're just here to be honored and felt. And they can't actually hurt us.
Right. And what happens is we end up really creating a sense of safety when we allow ourselves to feel our emotions. I've talked about this before. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. Mm-hmm. And if the beach ball is our feelings, it takes a lot of energy to keep that beach ball underwater. And think about when we let that beach ball up and we play with it, it's light, it's fun. Not all feelings are light and fun, but it's just energy that moves right through us. There's this fear around our feelings, but when we use mindfulness, we learn that feelings come and go, and it's just energy that moves through us. And we end up having this really deep sense of connection when we get comfortable having our feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. And the feelings are, often they're appropriate to the context, right? One of the things that, kind of drives me a little bit crazy is that this labeling of them as positive or negative, as opposed to just appropriate to the context, that our feelings are there. They're part of being human. And we do get that deep sense of connection when we're comfortable having our feelings because they're really universal. Like they can really connect us.
I think I would actually go a step further and not even use the word appropriate to the context, that our feelings just are. And I've talked about this as a highly sensitive person. Like I'm judgmental. I get disappointed. I've got expectations, and all of the feelings that come up for me, they're my feelings. And whether they're, for me, I don't really like the appropriate or not appropriate because they're just my feelings. And when I allow myself to have them, they come, I feel them, and they go.
Yeah.
Yeah. These are the things that we're going to be covering in these online groups that we are going to be running. We wanted to give you a little bit more information so that you can know what to expect. If you have any questions about the current groups that we're going to be running, if you go to unapologeticallysensitive.com, there's a landing page with contact information, and you can either reach out to Jen If you want to take Jen's groups, if you want to take my groups, my information is there. Jen, I have to say, when I listen to you, like, I think I want to take your group. Your voice is it's so soothing and calming.
Aw. I want to come be in your group. I always learn something. We learn so much from each other.
Yeah, we do. Is there anything else before we wrap up that we want to talk about?
Oh, I guess I would just want to reiterate my excitement. I really love getting together with other HSPs. I love hearing about their experiences. Elaine Aaron, of course, our lead researcher, has done such a good job in capturing it. And yet I love hearing the idiosyncratic, right? The individual experiences of being an HSP. So, however being highly sensitive shows up for you, I look forward to learning more about it and really learning more from everybody in the groups.
And Dr. Elaine Aaron says that it's really important for highly sensitive people to be with other highly sensitive people. One of the intentions in us creating these groups are to create a small group where you can hopefully build some community. You will be with other people that experience things that are similar to you. Because we set them for 10 weeks, we want you to have time to take the information, digest it, practice it, come back to group, see how it worked, go out, practice some more. So you really get that sense of taking in information and get to practice it in your lives. Often we do these trainings that are a full day or a weekend. It's a lot to take in, but then we don't really get the chance to use it and practice it in our daily lives. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do a longer group, to really give everybody a chance that wants to learn some new tools to go out and practice them.
Get that support, right? Get that support, that feedback over the course of 10 weeks really help make it yours.
Right. Anything else, Jen?
No, I'm very excited to get started.
Thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for being here today and listening to this episode. I'm really curious to know, did you get kind of a sense of some of the skills that you have that you didn't know that you had? Did you find some areas where maybe you want to work on them a little bit more? I think that we often are so kind of into being highly sensitive people that we don't always have the language or the words to know what goes on for us, the things that we struggle with. And I think that we have so many more coping skills than we think that we do. But if we don't talk about it, we don't name it, and it's hard to identify what they are. So I really hope that you found this helpful. If you're enjoying the podcast, please share it with other people. You can go to the show notes, and if you can rate it on iTunes, it really helps people to find it. Surprisingly, this podcast is listened to the most in the US. Do you know what the second highest number of downloads is? It's in Russia. And that's due to one of our listeners who's been writing some blogs in Russian about some of our episodes, and she's in our Facebook group. So thank you very much, Elena. I really appreciate it. This podcast is being listened to worldwide. I really would love to get the word out. You know what Jen Perry says when we do our intro is that the world needs highly sensitive people. And I think the more people know about this trait, they know about themselves, they know what their strengths are. Like I've said, we're the change makers, we're the peacekeepers, we're the healers, we're the teachers, we're the justice makers. I really would love for as many people to know about the trait of being a highly sensitive person, to know that we have amazing superpowers. Hey again. I hope you found that helpful. A couple of things that I want to talk about that Jen and I talk about this in the episode, and we recorded this back in May. And some of the issues that I had around time and Jen showing up, Jen really helped me to see that I can know that I've got value and worth, and people don't have to show up on time. That so much of my orientation has been about identifying something that goes on, and then you communicate it, and then you either get it or you don't. And I'm kind of moving into this new level of my awareness where I can know that I matter. I can let people know what's important to me. But Jen really helped me see that I've got value and worth whether people show up on time. And it's funny because we've been meeting to do curriculum updates, and this morning she was about 5 minutes late, and I wondered if maybe she had forgotten, and nothing came up for me around she's not here. I know she has a lot going on. So there is power about talking about the things that we struggle with, and then we get healing from them. And I feel so grateful that Jen was open to letting me work through this with her. Let me tell you a little bit about what the structure of each of the groups look like. We start out with, I don't swear on the podcast, so with the how the heck are you grounded meditation that either Jen or I will lead, checking in with physically and emotionally, where are you at? Are you having tension in your body? Who's showing up today? Is it a part of you that's anxious or worried or upset or any of those things? And so we start each group out with an exercise in mindfulness. Jen and I have recorded videos on each of the topics that we cover in the course, and the videos are between 20 and 30 minutes apiece. So a week before the group, we send out these videos with some prompts so that it gives you a chance to get some education about what that topic is, how we see it showing up. We talk a lot about the things that we personally struggle with. That's a big part of the group, that we want to be really real with you, that we have things that we struggle with, and we want you to have really realistic expectations. The difference is, as you learn tools, this stuff doesn't knock us out for days like it used to. Sometimes it's still uncomfortable. Sometimes it sucks. And we can hold both of those things together. We can struggle and we can do the things that we need to do. We can feel deeply and still function. So you get these videos, you get prompts a week ahead of time so that when we have group, we do our how the heck are you warm up, and then the rest of the group is really open to either talking about that week's topic or whatever else that is coming up that people need to talk about. Right now, we've got early bird pricing at a pretty significant discount. If you want to get any information, go to unapologeticallysensitive.com. There's an HSP group tab page that you can go to. We've got this episode will be up there, and then we've got short audio clips if you just want to rehear, like, what does each of these modules cover? There's also short bullet points about each of the modules. Maybe you're wondering, who is this group for? If you're ready to use your gifts in the world, this group is for you. You want to claim your empowerment. You want to embrace and celebrate your highly sensitive traits. This doesn't mean you don't struggle. It doesn't mean that you have a charmed life. It doesn't mean that everything is perfect in your life. And I find a real challenge that when Jen and I were talking this morning, if you would have asked me 6 months ago how I show up in the world, I don't think I would have been able to see the strengths and the gifts that I have. I've shared with you, this podcast is really growing me up. So my concern in saying, is this group for you? That my guess is that you are doing much better in your life than you think that you are. But because we have such strong emotional responses to things, and our system can get so over-aroused and overstimulated, we often use that as the marker for how well we're doing. And we can be doing very well and having those things going on at the same time. If you're curious, if you want to learn more about your traits and your strengths and how to navigate and have more ease, if you feel like you've got some blind spots, you feel stuck, if you want support, if you want to be part of a community, I mean, there are lots of ways. Even through this course, Jen and I, who are both very seasoned therapists and coaches, we learned stuff as we were doing the videos. Things came up for us. So this is not a beginner's course. I think it's for anybody who wants to learn more about how to navigate more efficiently and to learn some tools. One of the participants in this group shared at the end that this group was incredibly powerful and transformational. They have been working with a very, very seasoned HS therapist for a few years. I know this therapist and I are very closely aligned. I respect the work that this therapist does. And what this group member said was, being able to be in a group and to see the traits that they struggled with internally personified in other people created this shift that all this time in therapy really hadn't been able to do. And I'm not dissing any therapists. I want to be really clear about that. But if you look up evidence-based practices for group therapy, this is what the power of groups is, that we go through our own stuff, but when we see it showing up in other people, we're able to have so much more compassion. And if you think about how do you talk to your best friend when they're struggling, it's very different than how we struggle. I watched this individual who I knew before groups started make some incredibly powerful changes. Now, I can't promise that that's going to happen to everybody, but I think that this idea of seeing other people go through their process really minimizes that sense of isolation, that there's something wrong with us, that we're weirdos. It increases our compassion for others, and it increases our ability to have self-compassion. So it's one of the most powerful aspects of being in a group if it's a good fit for you. I know that as highly sensitive people, we often have a hard time making decisions. Not everybody, but this is a lot of money. Is this going to be of value? What I'm going to offer, provided that I don't get inundated, is a free half-hour deepening call or video. So let's get on a call or video together. Let's get your questions answered. There's no pressure to sign up at all, no expectation, but we'll take you to the next step of your journey. Sometimes just talking about what we're wanting or needing clears a way for us to see how it is that we need to get there. If you have a little thought in your mind and you're interested or entertaining the idea of joining a group, why don't you give yourself the gift of a free deepening call with me and let's see what comes up. Like I said, there's no pressure or obligation. My vision is that each and every HSP in the world really knows about their strengths, their gifts. The world needs HSPs. We need you. You're the healers. We need you in the world. And if there's anything that I can do to provide support, information, education so that you recognize what your gifts are, that's what I feel like I'm here to do, provided I'm able to do that. I really appreciate you being here today. I've been talking a lot about what it means to live unapologetically and what does that mean to you. I have an episode that I've done on Facebook and on my YouTube channel if that's interesting to you and you want to hear a little bit more about that, but to think in terms of what does it mean to live an unapologetic life. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate each and every one of you. If you're interested in working with me individually or the groups are interesting to you, give yourself the gift of a free half-hour deepening call. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.